Okay guys, in this lesson we are going to be taking a look at another V-Ray geometry, which is V-Ray Fur, and as the name suggests, it allows you to produce some simple hair and fur in your renders. To create V-Ray Fur, simply select the object you want to add the fur to. In this case, let's select this pillow object. Then click on the V-Ray Fur from the Create panel or from the V-Ray toolbar. And you have added V-Ray Fur to your scene. You can see a representation of V-Ray Fur in the viewport, and the fur object itself is under Pillow 01 object. Let's select V-Ray Fur and let's take a look at its parameters. First, you can specify the source object to which the fur will be applied. You can simply click on the object picker and choose any object you want. To get something presentable, in this case, we need to adjust the gravity value. Right now it is set to -3, and this is the force that pulled these strands down along the z-axis. If I decrease it to something like -0.3, now the gravity does not affect the strands as much as before. Before adjusting anything else, let's go to the material editor, create a new V-Ray hair material. Choose any of the hair presets that you want. In this case, let's use red matte to make sure the colors work with the lighting. Now apply the material both to the pillow and to the fur. If I go ahead and render the scene right now, this is the result we are going to get in render 01. Let's close the material editor and get back to fur parameters. Length is obviously the length of the fur strands. In this case, let's leave it at 15 centimeters. Thickness is the thickness of the strands. 0.2 centimeter, as we saw in the render, is not working with the scene and gives very thick strands. So in this case, let's set it to something like 0.05 centimeters. We have bend, which is set to 1 by default. When set to 0, the strands are straight, and as we increase the bend value, the strands start to bend under the influence of gravity. Let's set it to something like 0.7 for now. We have taper. Increasing this value will make each strand thinner in its upper end and wider in its base, and the value goes from 0 to 1. In this case, let's use something like 0.5. Now if we render the scene with this settings, this is going to be our render, which is render 02. Okay, let me close the frame buffer for now. In the geometric detail section, we have this nuts parameter, and as these strands are formed by connecting smaller straight line segments, nuts is the number of those segments, and if I decrease it to something like 3, you can see the strands become jagged. Let's leave it at something like 8. We have this level of detail, which when enabled, V-Ray will generate less fur geometry for parts of the scene which are far away from the camera. And start distance specifies the distance from the camera at which V-Ray is going to start implementing the level of detail adjustment. Up to this distance, the fur will be generated as specified by the user. After that, V-Ray decreases the density and increases the thickness of these strands. Let me disable level of detail for now. In the variation section, we can add variation to direction, length, thickness, gravity, and curl. The value is from 0 to 1. By default, all of them are set to 0.2, so they are going to have a 20% variation by default. In this case, let's set the direction variation to 0.3, length variation to 0.6, gravity variation to 0.5, and curl variation to 0.6. Now if we, right now we don't have any curl in the scene, but we're going to add it in a moment. If we render the scene, the result would be render 03. And if I compare it to our previous renders, we get a huge difference. In the distribution section, we can control the density of the strands. By default, it's set to per area, which specifies the number of strands per squared scene unit. For example, if the system units are in centimeter, like here, this parameter specifies the desired number of strands per square meter or per square centimeter, or you can set it to per face, which specifies the number of fur strands per face of the source object. Every face will generate the specified number of first strands. In this case, let's increase pair area value to 1, and if we render the scene, the result would be render 0.4, which is going to give us a more dense distribution of the hair strands compared to our previous renders. Let's set the pair area back to 0.2. In the placement section, you can decide on which polygons of the source object will be used to generate first strands, the entire object, only selected faces, or polygons with certain material ID. And in the curl section, you can make the hairs curly. Let's set the curl radius to 10 and number of curls to 25. And in the, can actually render the scene, and the result would be render 0.5 with the curl options right now. And in the maps rollout, we can control different properties of the strands using textures. For example, let's try controlling density of the strands with a map. Let's use a checker map. And now drag the checker map to the material editor. Set the tiling to 10 and 10. Change color 1 to a dark gray like with a value like 8, and color 2 to a value like 51. Now if we render the scene, we're gonna get render 0.6, and you can clearly see the checker pattern controlling the density of the hair. And the colors set in the checker pattern are a multiplier to the actual density value set in the distribution rollout. For the final render, let me clear this map for now. Enable curl and set it to 10 and 25. And if we render the scene, this is our first final render with a bit higher dimension and higher quality settings. And for the next render, let's turn off curl and just render it as simple as it is. And this is going to be our second final render. Okay, so in this lesson we learned about V-Ray Fur. I will see you in the next lesson.